The Tragedy of Oli Ricker. The Ricker Duology, Book 1. To all those whose imagination have yet to be baptized, may your journey be quickened. Prologue. The Sister. Layla Ricker chewed her lower lip and prayed her father wasn't dead. Barefoot, she bounced on her toes as dying grass scratched at her calves, her fingers twisting strands of her hair until they knotted like thread in a broken spindle. Spanning the horizon in each direction was a wall of trees, leaves shivering in the bitter wind. Thunder rolled along in the distance, and goosebumps ran up Layla's arm. Like a blanket, she wrapped her arms about herself to fend off the cold and fear. It should be too late in the fall for storms. She hated it here on the wood's edge. The sight of the forest made her stomach clench in dread. Maybe it was the knotty trunks, or the way all the shadows beneath the canopy looked like knives. But whatever it was, Layla stayed at least a dozen leaps away from the tree line and muttered more prayers, this time grudgingly including her brother, Oli. Oli and their father had been gone into the wood longer than ever before, having left watchful the morning of the previous day. Right now, the sky was full of darkening clouds. But Layla thought it might be a bit past midday. That meant it had been a full day, a night, and a half a day again since they'd left. Pa had never been in the wood all night long before. In fact, as far as Layla knew, no one else had either. Mama said it was too dangerous and too stupid. But yesterday, Pa had marched off with Oli and a dozen other hunters and their dogs, the largest pack hunt anyone had ever seen. He wasn't planning on coming back until breakfast the next day, which would have been breakfast today. They were late, and late wasn't good. Layla turned around, trying to spend her energy somehow. The land sloped gently upward for a dozen bow shots or so, busy farmland coloring the world in yellows and browns. Eventually, the gentle slope turned to a sharp cliff face, at the top of which Layla could see houses of wood and stone sitting stoically on top of the hill. If she looked at it just right, she could make it look as if the houses were rising into the sky. Her house was one of them, and Layla squinted to see if she could spot Mama through the kitchen window. Mama would be watching the forest's edge too. She was too stubborn to come down here, but Layla knew she'd be watching all the same. She always grew more stubborn when she was worried. And the two of them wouldn't be the only ones watching. The whole town would have their eye on the tree line, though it surprised Layla she was the only one watching this close. She knew the wood was scary and all, but shouldn't there be other daughters, other mamas, all waiting around for them to come back? There were plenty of field hands who kept stopping, leaning on their tools, and wagging fingers toward the wood while they talked to one another, but that was about it. A twig snapped, and Layla spun back around, her breath quickening as she searched the trees. She didn't know if they'd emerge from here exactly, but Pa said she had good instincts, so Layla figured she'd guess right. She swallowed spit that pooled beneath her tongue. Why did her throat feel dry if her mouth kept making so much spit? "Come on," she mumbled. Nothing happened. The breeze kept blowing, making her legs shiver beneath her dress. She could smell the rain coming now, could feel pressure on her temples that told her it was going to be a bad one. Not just a rain, but one hell of a damnable storm, as Pa would say. But it was too late in the season for storms. "Come on," Layla said again, her words hardly audible. Her nose began to run with snot, and she wiped it with the back of her hand. "Come back." Another twig snapped. Layla turned to the right, certain now that's where the noise had come from. She stepped towards the sound and heard another snapping, then the rustling of tree branches. She ran towards the sound, getting closer to the wood than she'd like. But for a moment, she didn't care. There was sound, life from within the wood, and nothing ever emerged from the wood except the hunters that went inside. Which meant that as she was hearing a noise, a blur of motion burst from behind a large patch of brush beneath a white oak. It was all flailing limbs and flying cloak, but Layla could recognize her older brother anywhere. 15 and gangly with curly black hair to match her own, though with skin a few shades darker, like Mama's. He tore from the wood's edge with a cry, falling in a rolling heap to the grass, gasping for breath as Layla ran over. "Hoy, you all right?" It was stupid to ask. Before she saw it, Layla could smell the blood, the sweat, the piss. Even she knew those smells all mixed together was bad. Oli lay on his back, chest arching as he tried to suck in breath. His cloak was torn, his chest and legs and face all splattered with blood, and his bow was missing. And he was alone. Layla stood there, frozen as Oli writhed for another moment, gulping air as if he'd been drowning. And then, when air had filled his lungs, his eyes burst open to the sky above, and he screamed. And Layla screamed too. It wasn't long until a crowd formed around Oli and Layla, a mass of bodies squirming like maggots on the outer edges of Layla's tear-blurred vision. They were the field hands mostly, but others were coming now too, and Layla prayed Mama would be one of them. Oli thrashed about, crying out with wide eyes that couldn't seem to see her. Layla fell to her knees, close enough she could feel the warmth of her skin. But what could she do? Her hands opened, closed, opened again, helpless to do anything but watch and fear and cry. "Out of my way!" It wasn't Mama's voice, but an old man's, cackly with age and impatience. "Move now!" Evanvolt was a priest of the Order of Deos, with skin which may have once been light and fair but had grown leathery and spotted from years beneath the sun. He smelled so strongly of garlic and sweat that Layla involuntarily leaned away as he burst through the crowd and knelt frantically on the other side of Oli. "Get back!" Oli cried, worming himself away from the priest and into Layla, staining her dress with blood. "What happened?" Evanvolt said, his hands reaching forward and probing along Oli's head and chest before Oli could protest further, his knobby fingers coming away red. Layla knew she should stop crying and tell Evanvolt whatever would help him save her brother. But tears only flowed faster from her eyes, her chest stuttering as she tried to catch her breath. "Poor lad came skittering out of there," a woman said, finger pointing toward the wood. "Been manic ever since, ain't much else to tell." Evanvolt grunted, and wispy strands of white hair fell around his ears. He muttered to himself, eyes half closed. "Erkuda, Philia, Ambalia, Iolasi. This is bad." Bad. The word thudded in Layla's mind, and every time she sucked in a desperate breath between tears, she could hear it repeated over and over again. "Get back," Oli said again, but it was weak, and Evanvolt paid no heed. Layla was vaguely aware of the world shifting around her, people squawking and moving, but it was all she could do to stay upright, the fingers of her hands entangled in her brother's hair, though she wasn't sure when that had happened. "Oliver?" "Mama." Layla opened her eyes and watched as her mother flung herself on the ground above Oli's head, tears matching Layla's own flowing over her cheeks, but her eyes were firm, fixed on Oli even through the tears. "Oliver, what happened? Where's your father?" Oli screamed. It was loud and blood-curdling, his back arching as if the very question had brought him unfathomable pain. "What happened, priest?" Her voice demanded answers of the priest, but her eyes stayed fixed on her son. Your husband happened, Evanwald growled. He got the Strayazar riled up and, to my son, Mama snapped, looking up and eyes flashing dangerously at the priest for a heartbeat before turning back to Ollie. Evanwald shook his head. Many things, Orelda. Bear claws are the worst of it, I think. But his mind has been rattled too, and the vines have leached his blood. Can you? Mama stopped, biting her lip hard enough to draw her own blood. Ollie grabbed her wrist, pulling her downward toward him. She put her forehead to his, her tears falling into Ollie's eyes, the blood from her lip falling into his hair. Can you save him? That's what Mama wanted to ask. It's what Layla wanted to ask. But Layla couldn't say the words, couldn't stop crying long enough to catch her breath. Evanwald looked at Layla, his eyes twin black dots holding her dirty reflection. Those eyes had always made Layla want to squirm, to crawl inside of herself. They were the eyes of a priest, holy and sacred, pronouncing judgment every time they fell on her. I can save his body, Evanwald said, speaking to Layla as if she'd asked the question. But Deus alone can save the mind. Thunder rolled and Ollie screamed again, his breath billowing out with such force that Mama's hair rustled with it. Demons, someone said. Not Viamones, Evanwald said, standing. Thanks be to the Maker, no Viamones. I'll stabilize him here, but we'll need to get him indoors soon. You, he pointed to a thick-set man with a soil-stained trousers. Fetch a long blanket and bring it here. Everyone else, back away. I need room. Layla hadn't thought he'd meant her, but Layla hadn't thought he meant her, but Mama scooped her up and dragged her backward along the grass. Let him work, she said to Layla's ear. Only the Maker can save him now. Evanwald stood above Ollie and breathed in deep, his hands moving to his sides like tools at the ready. Below him, Ollie jerked about on the ground, though Layla wasn't sure if it was in pain or horror. A fresh wind of energy surged through him, and his scars... A fresh wind of energy surged through him, and his screams roared so loud Layla wanted to hold her fists to her ears. But she clung to her mother instead. And then slowly words rolled from the priest's mouth as his hands rose upward, fingers moving in complex patterns in the air above Ollie. Elmes cavo deos dio force nima elmes mi enveroma. It began to rain, a pitter-patter of icy drops like 100 little warning bells. A few of the watchers scattered then, yet most stayed. Layla and Mama didn't move, their eyes locked on Ollie. Evanwald never faltered, just continued to pour out words whose meaning Layla couldn't fathom. The rain picked up, becoming a steady sheet of water blanketing them, but unable to smother the priest's chant. Ollie wasn't screaming anymore, and he wasn't writhing about either. He looked like he'd fallen asleep, his chest rising and falling, eyes closed and mouth open to the rain. Evanwald kept going, fingers dancing as he sewed a complicated stitch to mend a bad tear in a tunic sleeve. The priest kept his eyes closed, but Layla could see them twitch when he said certain words as if his holy power caused him pain. The rain came sideways now, and Layla shivered beneath the onslaught when a shadow moved across her, bringing with it the scent of death strong enough to cover the smell of garlic and holiness. She looked up to see Inej standing beside her, one hand stroking his long red beard and the other holding the bowl of a pipe overflowing with rainwater. He was a Velk, which might as well just be called a giant, twice as large as Papa, with his head as high as ceiling rafters and eyes Layla tried never to look at. The Velk scared her. Mama held her tighter, but neither of them moved away, and eventually Layla turned back to Ollie. Where's Papa? The thought snuck into Layla's mind unbidden. She knew the answer even as her mind asked the question. How often had she been told to stay away from the wood? Told it was dangerous, that the world inside was cursed and could kill. Every time her father had gone inside, he risked his life, and when he'd begun bringing Oli, he'd been risking his son's life as well. Evanvald stopped. It was sudden. One moment his arms and lips were both wagging, the next his shoulders went slack, as if exhaustion had yanked him back down. Above the wind and rain, he called out, "Where's that blanket?" Men shuffled about, but no blanket materialized. Inej stepped forward, and Evanvald gave him a sour look. "Oi, if it's all the same to you, priest," Inej said. Evanvald looked to Orelda, who gave a stiff nod. "Gently, Velk," Evanvald warned. "Very gently." Inej gave a nod and placed his pipe between his lips, then knelt and scooped Oli into his arms with exaggerated caution. When he turned, Oli looked the size of a babe against the giant's chest. Mama stepped forward, hands coming up to caress her son's face. "Priest," she said, placing her forehead against Oli's. The rain watered down the blood now, so it ran in streams off Oli's body. "Tell me." "He'll live," Evanvald said, gesturing for Inej to get moving. Mama's next breath was heavy and ragged as Inej carefully pulled away from her, starting toward the hill. "How do you know? Are you sure?" "I've stopped the bleeding inside and out," Evanvald said, walking alongside the Velk, his voice getting louder as the rain continued to pick up. Layla could hardly hear. "But I've told you, I can do nothing for his mind." Orelda walked beside the priest, Layla following as if dragged by an invisible line. The rain had turned the ground to mud, and their boots squished, leaving deep prints with each step, except for Inej. His boots still managed to thud down, splashing water and mud up to Layla's waist and leaving craters that quickly filled with rainwater. "What do you mean about his mind?" Mama demanded. "Don't toy with me now. Tell me plainly." The priest stayed silent for a long time as they trudged uphill, heads down against the battering rain. To Layla, it felt like they were mourning, as if this were a funeral procession happening beneath the tears of God. Lightning flashed and thunder rolled over them a handful of heartbeats later. "His mind," Evanvald said, hand waving in the air as if searching out the right words. "I could feel its brokenness. It won't easily mend, Orelda. He'll need prayer, peace." "What do we do? How do we heal him? Tell me. The Maker must do something." "Get him into the temple," Evanvald said, slowing his steps and turning to Mama. He ran a hand over his head, pulling back wet wisps of hair. "I'll write a letter recommending him to the abbey at Erason, if you'd like." "Oh, he'd never." "Or I can work with the magistrate to apprentice him to one of the trades, just for the Maker's sake, Orelda. Keep the boy out of that damned wood."